Coming up on this episode, Steve Kerr has confirmed the Golden State Warriors starting lineup for Saturday's first preseason game against the Los Angeles Lakers. Plus, plenty happened at Media Day on Monday. So we'll go through all the major takeaways, including a veteran firming for the Warriors' 14th roster spot. Yes, welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. Hope you're all having a good start to your week and are excited for Warrior basketball to return here in 4 days on Saturday against the Los Angeles Lakers. We've had our first little nugget of information regarding that game with Steve Kerr pulling no punches, listing his starting lineup straight up for Saturday's game against the Lakers. So, unsurprisingly, we'll see Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Andrew Wiggins, Kevon Looney, and of course the new high-profile off-season acquisition via trade of Chris Paul. So we'll see CP, I'm assuming, starting at the point, Steph at the 2, Klay at the 3, Wiggs at the 4, and Loon at the 5. This is what Steve had to say earlier in the day regarding this lineup. He said, those 5 guys will start the first game, but as I said in camp, we're going to try a lot of different lineups through the exhibition season. They'll start the first game and we'll see after that. We've got to try a lot of different groups and see what we have. Now, that might be true, but I would be surprised if there was any other lineup for opening night against the Phoenix Suns on October 24. Obviously, Draymond Green's got his ankle injury, which is going to put him out for 4 to 6 weeks. Most likely, almost certainly going to miss that opening night game against the Suns. Last episode, I spoke about the potential of Jonathan Kuminga being in the starting lineup, Dario Saric as well. Go back and check that out if you haven't already. But as I said, I'd be surprised if we didn't see anything aside from a CP, Steph, Klay, Wiggs, and Looney lineup. And honestly, I think it actually makes more sense than a lineup with Dre in exchange for Loon. I know that I personally would be excited to see JK out there, but I think the lineup with CP and Loon instead of CP and Dre actually makes a little bit more sense. Now, I know Draymond Green is one of the most versatile players in NBA history and probably almost certainly the most versatile player of the last 10 years defensively, but I do think you feel a little bit more comfortable with the extra size and rebounding and still, stating the fact that you've got a 6'9" player out there in Loon, rather than going, incredibly small with the 6'6" Dre. So it actually does make a little bit more sense to me, and I don't particularly hate it. I don't particularly like the idea of a starting lineup with CP, Steph, Klay, Wiggs, Dre. That is just way too small for me. I feel a lot more comfortable with having Loon there as the center, with the size and the rebounding that he can provide. We heard Chris Paul and Kevon Looney asked about their roles at Media Day yesterday, and I actually thought if you're a Warrior fan, you'd have to be pretty happy with what you heard throughout the entirety of Media Day, but in particular regarding those 2 players and who will be the 6th man and coming off the bench for the Warriors this season. CP, obviously, he's been the one that's been most hesitant towards a 6-man role since his acquisition on draft day in June, and it was really the first time that he appeared comfortable and a little bit more willing to me about a potential 6-man role, which is unsurprising because obviously we're a lot closer to the start of the season now than what we were when he first spoke about it, a couple of weeks after his acquisition right at the start of the off-season. But he made reference to coming off the bench effectively for Team USA in the past, which was really the first time that he'd even mentioned that in discussions. So I think that would have to make you feel pretty good as a Warrior fan that, hey, this guy might actually be willing to partake in a 6-man role and impact the team in a way that, most fans, I think, feel that he should in terms of coming off the bench. And Loon, classic unselfish Loon, and I feel like we take it for granted a little bit, but this guy, the way he's been able to impact the team, both as a player but leadership-wise, and again, it came through yesterday at Media Day when he said that I don't really care, that I think, I've worked hard enough and impacted the game enough to be a starter in this league, but, he said he also recognises the resume that the other 5 have, having all played in multiple All-Star games, or Wiggs has played in 1 All-Star game, but for the other 4, they've all played in multiple All-Star games. So the self-reflection, the general selflessness of Kevon Looney continues to shine through, And we know for him that whether he starts or comes off the bench, he's going to give it all. He's going to bring the exact same heart and energy that he does on every night, regardless of whether he's starting or coming off the bench. I actually feel like it's disappointing in a way, particularly if you go back to last season in the playoffs where he was arguably the Warriors' second best player behind Steph Curry in that first round series against the Sacramento Kings. And he absolutely put on a clinic against Domantas Sabonis. He dominated Domantas Sabonis, particularly on the boards, which if you went into that series, a lot of Kings fans thought that's where they had the edge, that Sabonis would be able to dominate and that Loon wouldn't be able to match up with him. And he absolutely, as I said, he absolutely dominated him, had over 100 rebounds for the 7-game series. I think Sabonis had about 30 less rebounds for the series. And then obviously we transitioned to the second round series against the Lakers. Steve Kerr wanted a lot more shooting out on the floor, and all of a sudden Loon basically goes back to being a bench player in that series. So it is strange. It's fantastic the way that Loon embraces and accepts the regular, switching between him being a starter and him coming off the bench. And we'll just have to, as Steve said, we'll just have to wait and see what happens with that. But I think, most, importantly, you would feel comfortable as a Warrior fan with what both Chris Paul and Kevon Looney had to say yesterday. The interesting thing about, this lineup with Chris Paul in it is that Andrew Wiggins is going to be at the 4, and Klay Thompson is going to be at the 3. But defensively, Klay is going to be guarding the 4s. Now that makes a lot of sense. Wiggs is the best perimeter/wing defender that the Warriors have. I think most importantly here, we need to start recognizing, and I've wrote about it all off season, really talking about the Warriors and their 3-guard lineup with Chris Paul, Steph Curry, and Klay Thompson. I think we just need to reiterate and try and drill into our heads here that Klay Thompson's just a small forward at this point of his career. And I think that's fine. Like, athletically, he doesn't have quite what he had, pre-injuries, which is absolutely understandable. And he's also, he's 6'6", 6'7". Like, that's a general, average size for a small forward. So I think if we just start to drill into our heads that Klay's a small forward, I think we just feel more comfortable with the idea of Chris Paul and Steph Curry and Klay Thompson playing together on the floor at the one time. But obviously defensively, as I said, Wiggs will take the best perimeter/wing player, which slides Klay down to guarding 4s, which Steve Kerr confirmed in his media conference today. And I think actually in some lineups against some teams, Klay might actually be going some 5s here. And what I say now is that if it's going to be, if the Dre comes back in and it's Loon on the bench and that's, the 5-man unit of CP, Steph, Wiggs, Klay, Dre, I think against some teams, you're actually going to see Klay guarding 5s. Now, what I speak about here, obviously it won't happen opening night because Dre's most likely going to be out. But if you're regular season or in the playoffs, later in the regular season or in the playoffs, and you're coming up against the Phoenix Suns and you're running that 5-man unit to close a game and you're running against a 5-man unit of Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, Eric Gordon, Kevin Durant, and Yusuf Nurkic, then I think primarily you want Dre against KD. I don't think you want Klay guarding KD at all, but you want Dre on KD. You ideally want Wiggs on Booker. I think in that scenario, Steph would take Bradley Beal. And then I think CP would take Eric Gordon. That leaves Klay on Yusuf Nurkic. And I think from a Warrior perspective, you'd actually be okay with that, because if you want to dump the ball into Yusuf Nurkic and let him go to work and try and punish that mismatch all game or late in the game, I think that's probably what you want from a Warrior perspective. You want the ball out of Kevin Durant's hands, out of Bradley Beal's hands, out of Devin Booker's hands, and you want the ball and the offense run through Yusuf Nurkic. So I don't think that that's actually too much of a concern. It's just going to be, obviously, a game-by-game thing, depending on, what lineups the Warriors are running and what lineups they're coming up against. But obviously, there's not too many great 4s in the league that are necessarily going to be able to punish Klay. As I said, against KD, you're going to have Dre guarding him. Against Giannis at the Bucks, you're going to have Dre guarding him as well. So I think there's going to be a little bit of an interesting dynamic here, especially defensively, with what the Warriors do in particular lineups and against particular lineups as well. But we'll move forward to Media Day yesterday and some of the takeaways from that. The biggest thing for me, the most surprising element, like most of Media Day yesterday was primarily focused on Chris Paul, which was no surprise. That was long forthcoming. And, he obviously had an extensive press conference, which I think was a positive thing for the Warriors. I think he spoke pretty well and pretty favourably. A lot of other players, the veterans, were asked about how Chris Paul was going to gel with them, and the younger players were asked about how Chris Paul would be able to help them and their development. But the most surprising element for me was the presence of Rudy Gay. I found this pretty strange. His kind of presence at Media Day was almost as if he was a guaranteed part of the team, which he's not. We heard from ESPN's Adrian Wojnarowski last week, who reported that Rudy Gay had signed a deal with the Warriors, but that he would compete for the vacant 14th roster spot at training camp. Well, he was donning James Wiseman's number 33 in photos. He was the only one of the players on the training camp deals to go up and have a press conference at Media Day. And just the way that other teammates were being asked about him during their own media conferences, it just gave me a sense that this guy is almost, him being the 14th guy on the roster is a fait accompli, which I don't think it is. I think he's a firm favourite now, particularly after what I saw at Media Day. He spoke with 95.7 The Game Steiny and Guru as well. And he actually confirmed that he was given other offers from other teams, but that he felt different about, and that was his words, he felt different about this one with the Warriors, which also gives me an indication that I don't think he would have signed that deal with the Warriors unless there was some kind of confidence or security that he would indeed get the 14th roster spot. Now, obviously, he's got to go out there and showcase what he can do in training camp at the moment, come preseason, which obviously starts against the Lakers on Saturday. So he's still got some work to do to guarantee that. But right now, I think he's probably 80% favourite, if not higher. Just because I don't think the Warriors would have put him out there for a press conference, wouldn't have had teammates talking about him like they did, without some security here that he's going to be the guy, the 14th roster spot guy. So how do I feel about that? I'm not sure. His year last season with the Jazz wasn't great. 5.9 points per game, I think it was. 38% shooting from the floor, 25% from three-point range. Now, maybe you think playing again, alongside other veterans, star level players like Steph and Clay, Chris Paul as a playmaker, maybe his efficiency scoring wise can take a major leap from what we saw last season. But he's also 37 years of age, and this is continuing the Warriors' mentality of a win now approach and taking guys that, quite frankly, are old. Chris Paul is 38. Rudy Gay is 37. They looked at Dwight Howard, who's 37. So it's interesting. I don't hate it, particularly against some of the other training camp guys with training camp deals, which includes Javen Johnson, Donovan Williams, Rodney Magruder as well. Rudy Gay is a lot more experienced, a lot more high profile than those guys. But again, at 37, how much of an impact can he have for the Warriors? I wrote about when he was first linked, or when he first became available as a free agent after getting bought out or waived, whichever he was. I did write about, and talk about, I just don't want him to come in and take, minutes off JK. Because I think JK is a much more impactful player now, and obviously he's got the upside that Rudy Gay doesn't have as a 37-year-old. So I'm just wary about that, and I'm wary about Steve Kerr leaning too much into experience and giving minutes to Rudy Gay when he could otherwise be giving them to Jonathan Kuminga. I'm slightly concerned about that. I don't think it's going to be too much of an issue, because I actually think the talent gap between Jonathan Kuminga and Rudy Gay and the impact that those two players can have this season will be wide enough that Steve Kerr's not even going to consider playing Rudy Gay above Jonathan Kuminga. I still think Rudy Gay will be a guy, as I said with most players in regard to his 14th roster spot, a guy that plays 10 minutes a game every third or fourth game. And he's not a nightly part of the rotation by any means. But it's certainly interesting. I thought it was the most surprising element from training camp yesterday, just the presence that Rudy Gay had there in terms of taking photos, in terms of being up in his own press conference. and the way that teammates spoke about him as well. Rudy Gay is a wing forward as such, has played a fair bit of small ball 5 in the last couple of seasons for Utah. Certainly isn't a traditional center though. And Draymond Green in his media conference was kind of asked about, the Warriors training camp deals, about, their interest in Dwight Howard. And he kind of hinted to the front office that he would like another big. He said, would a big be beneficial to us? I don't see it hurting us. I think it could add a benefit. The Lakers are huge. That's who we lost to. Doesn't mean we're necessarily going to lose again, but if we don't get the size, but it may help. So basically, Draymond was pretty comfortable, I suppose, with their current roster, and he said that Mike Dunleavy Jr. is doing a great job of filling the impossible shoes of Bob Myers. But he also did hint that, hey, we could do with some extra size here, because obviously there's no 7-footers on the roster. Dario Saric at 6'10" is the tallest player that they have available to them. Dre's obviously going to play a lot of small ball 5 at 6'6". Loon's generally going to be the starting center, at least to start the season, at 6'9". They actually listed Trace Jackson-Davis at 6'8" on the training camp roster there. And then obviously Usman Garuba as well, I think, is 6'8". So there's a lot of guys who you would classify as small ball 5s, and again, it goes down to what I've said all off-season with the Warriors, pushing more into finding, Golden State-style players, Steve Kerr-style players, rather than, necessarily getting a guy with, 7'1", 7'7" wingspan. I just listed James Wiseman's kind of athletic traits there. But that's kind of, what I mean. I mean, guys that are big just for the sake of being big. They're not interested in that. They ultimately didn't go with Dwight Howard or a couple of the other veteran centers that they looked at, which included Derek Favors, Tony Bradley, Dwayne Dedmon, those kind of things. The other aspect to the media day yesterday was the injuries for the Warriors. So as we've spoken about, Draymond Green, 4 to 6 weeks is still the timeline. He will get reevaluated by the Warriors in 2 weeks. He spoke about it, said it could have been a lot worse than what he initially thought. Said it's progressing well. He's a fast healer, he called himself. He had no moon boot on. He wasn't on crutches, so that's a good sign. I know for me personally, when I did mine, I was on crutches for about 3 days after. So hopefully he's back sooner rather than later, but the Warriors are clearly going to take a cautious approach there. And the other one which we didn't really know about was Corey Joseph. So he has got a lower back strain. He'll be also reevaluated in 2 weeks' time. Not nothing from the Warriors' perspective, not nothing. And the reason I say that is because they're obviously going to take a cautious approach with Dre and Corey Joseph. And I just wonder if both of those guys are out for the start of the regular season on October 24. That puts a lot of kind of ball handling and playmaking pressure on Chris Paul and Steph Curry. Now, obviously, you brought in Chris Paul for that particular reason, for, when injuries hit, you've got a guy there who's one of the best ball handling and playmaking point guards in the history of the game, alongside, the best shooter in the game, Steph Curry. So you're kind of comfortable enough with that to start the season, but you don't want that to drag on for too much longer, because in Draymond Green and Corey Joseph, you've also got two of your most effective ball handlers and playmakers out as well. So you'd be a little bit concerned about that, because, if Steph or CP, they run into injury issues, or if there's some foul trouble in games, then who are you really looking at to come in, settle the offense, run the offense, and provide that playmaking and ball handling? I don't know who it is. I mean, in Summer League, we saw Brandon Pajemski do it. I don't think Warrior fans should be comfortable with him coming in and playing any more than a couple of minutes in that particular role. So he's certainly probably not going to be the one, and I just wonder who it is if that were to eventuate. So I think you'd be a little bit nervous, I suppose, if the Corey Joseph back injury drags on a little bit, or if and the Draymond back ankle injury drags on a little bit, just because it puts a bit of pressure on Steph and Chris Paul just to not get injured, really. And obviously those guys are 35 and 38 years of age, so you don't want to be putting too much pressure on them, particularly at the start of the regular season. Other than that, guys, going to have another episode in a couple of days with a guest on, so looking forward to that. In the meantime, you can find me on Twitter/X at POK252. That's POK252. If you haven't already, please subscribe on YouTube. Be greatly appreciated. You can follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify as well. Any comments, as I said, you can tweet me or leave below on our YouTube channel. Other than that, enjoy your next couple of days, and I'll see you soon.